A castle does not need centuries to become a ruin. Some castles have had people living in them for centuries without interruption. Some were never emptied. Some are still locked, and nobody quite knows what is inside. Across England, Scotland, and Wales, there are castles that do not appear in the guidebooks, that are not fully marked on Google Maps, that local people do not approach after dark, that historians cannot agree on. In this video, we are counting down 12 castles on the British Isles that you will not believe actually exist. Not just beautiful ruins. Castles with dungeons where human remains have been found. Castles whose ownership is still disputed. Castles whose original purpose was never fully documented. Stay with me to the end, because the castle at number 1 stands in one of the most isolated landscapes in the British Isles, has been owned by the same family for nearly 500 years, and getting inside requires permission from that family. Nobody is giving that permission. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's begin. On the north coast of Aberdeenshire, near the village of Cruden Bay, a castle stands on the edge of a cliff above the North Sea. Slains Castle. Built in 1597. The roof was removed in 1836, and it has stood open to the sky since then. But what makes this castle significant is neither its age nor its architecture. Bram Stoker visited Slains Castle in the 1890s. What he found there affected him so profoundly that the novel he began writing shortly after his visit became Dracula. The long corridors, the clifftop position, the isolated atmosphere, all appear directly in Stoker's notes. Architectural historians have documented specific similarities between the rooms at Slains and the rooms in Dracula's castle. But what places Slains at the top of this list is not Dracula. It is the ocean. Slains Castle moves closer to the cliff edge by several centimeters every year. The sea is consuming the limestone beneath the castle's foundations. Engineering assessments have established that the structure faces a realistic risk of partial or complete collapse into the sea within the coming decades. The British government knows this. Historic Scotland has issued warnings. No serious structural protection funding has been committed. The castle that inspired Dracula is about to fall into the North Sea, and there is currently no formal plan to stop it. A few kilometers south along the same coastline, Dunnottar Castle stands on a sea stack cut off from the mainland, 3 sides surrounded by the North Sea. The only access is a narrow path cut into the rock face. In 1651, the Scottish crown jewels were brought to Dunnottar to hide them from Cromwell's Parliamentary forces. They were hidden here for 8 months. When the garrison finally surrendered, the English forces entered the castle. The jewels were gone. The wife of a local minister had smuggled them out in a small bundle past the besieging troops. That part is documented. But Dunnottar has an unanswered question. In 1685, in the underground chambers known as the Covenanters' Vault, 107 men and women were held prisoner for 6 weeks without access to fresh air, with inadequate food and water. How many died during that confinement is not precisely established. The castle's records for this period are incomplete. Dunnottar is one of Scotland's most visited castles. Hundreds of thousands of tourists descend each year. They enter the vault, take photographs, and leave. The story of the people held here for 6 weeks appears in the official interpretation. It receives about as much prominence as a traffic notice. Eilean Donan Castle is the most photographed castle in Scotland. It sits on a small island at the junction of 3 sea locks, connected to the mainland by a bridge, with mountains on every side. It appears in the vast majority of images sold internationally as Scottish landscape. It has appeared in films, advertising campaigns, and magazine covers. And almost nobody knows this. The castle you are looking at was built from scratch between 1919 and 1932. The original Eilean Donan Castle was bombarded by the British Royal Navy in 1719 during the suppression of the Jacobite Rising and completely destroyed. For 200 years only the ruins remained. In 1911, a man named John McCrae Gilstrap purchased the ruins. Using plans said to be based on a dream experienced by a local craftsman, He had the castle entirely rebuilt in the 20th century. A dream. Literally, the official history contains this account. What you see today is a 20th century interpretation of a destroyed castle, reconstructed according to a craftsman's vision. This is not a ruin. This is a reconstruction. The millions of people who visit do not generally know this, and the castle's promotional materials do not foreground it. On the Northumberland coast, on a basalt rock plateau above the North Sea, Braemar Castle stands 420 meters long. It was the political centre of the Northumbrian kingdom. In 1464, during the Wars of the Roses, it became the first English castle to be brought down by cannon fire. The first time artillery walls breached an English castle was here, but what places Bamburgh on this list is something else entirely. Braemar Castle is still private property. The Armstrong family has owned it since 1894. They still live in parts of it. And the castle holds an archaeological discovery from the 1960s that was documented, reported, and then quietly closed. When the cave system beneath the basalt rock was investigated, human remains were found dating to periods considerably earlier than expected. These remains went through standard archaeological channels, were documented, and then the discussion essentially stopped. The full content of those findings has never been published. The Bamburgh Research Project continues to work on this. Fragments of information have emerged over the years. The full picture has not. On the Menai Strait in North Wales, Caernarfon Castle stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The investiture of Princes of Wales has been held here. Edward I began construction in 1283, deliberately building it this large and this intimidating as a statement of English conquest of Wales. The walls are 9 meters thick. The towers are polygonal rather than round. A masterpiece of military engineering. But there is a dimension of Caernarfon that receives limited attention. Inside the castle walls, there are the remains of an earlier Welsh structure, dating to the early medieval period. This structure contains important information about what existed here before the Norman castles arrived. Excavations have documented these remains, but the Caernarfon narrative is built overwhelmingly around Edward I's construction. The earlier Welsh structure is a secondary footnote in the official interpretation materials. Inside a castle, built on top of Welsh history and designed to make that history invisible, the remains of that history are physically present. This paradox makes Caernarfon one of the most contested heritage sites in Wales. In the Derbyshire Hills, in a part of England that most people never pass through, there is a castle that almost nobody knows about, Bolsover Castle, built in the 17th century by William Cavendish, not for defence but for entertainment, to celebrate chivalric ideals, to stage romance. The series of rooms known as the Pleasure Rooms contain one of the most elaborate fresco programs of the period, mythological scenes, love allegories, the story of Eros and Psyche across multiple panels. Bolsover is chivalric romance expressed in stone and paint. But when you enter this castle, what you find does not match expectations. Because Bolsover began to fail roughly a century ago. Coal mining operations undermined the ground beneath the structure and caused serious damage. Some sections were restored. The remainder is still damaged. And the core problem is this: English Heritage owns the castle, but has consistently lacked the funding for comprehensive restoration. The frescoes are fading. The ceilings are cracking. The most unusual castle in Derbyshire is slowly coming apart. Alnwick Castle in Northumberland has been the seat of the Percy family, the Dukes of Northumberland, since the 14th century. They still live there. The castle was used as an external filming location for Hogwarts in the first 2 Harry Potter films. It appeared in Downton Abbey. This visibility draws hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, and the majority of them come for the Hogwarts photograph. But Alnwick's real story is considerably more complicated. The Percy family is one of the most powerful and turbulent families in English history. They were involved in the removal of 4 separate English kings from power. Henry Hotspur, a Percy, became the hero of multiple Shakespeare plays. The family controlled the land bordering Scotland in northern England for centuries and repeatedly rebelled to maintain that control. And the fact that this family still lives in their castle today carries ongoing questions about the English aristocratic land system. The castle is a tourism product. It is also a family home, and that family owns the largest private landholding in Northumberland. The question of how that land was originally acquired is one that sits behind every Hogwarts photograph taken at Alnwick. In the Dorset Hills, in the middle of a still-functioning village, the remains of Corfe Castle stand. But these are not ruins in the ordinary sense. Corfe Castle was deliberately demolished in 1646 by Parliamentary forces during the English Civil War. The demolition was systematic. The walls were blown apart with explosives. The angles you see today, the half walls leaning at impossible angles, the truncated geometry, are the evidence. This was not natural decay. This was deliberate destruction. Lady Mary Banks defended the castle through 2 sieges with a small garrison, while her husband sat in Parliament and could not be contacted. The castle finally fell through betrayal. A member of the garrison opened the gates. When Parliament took Corfe, they decided to demolish it so thoroughly that no one could ever use it again. So Corfe became simultaneously a monument to military engineering and to deliberate demolition. And today, Corfe village has integrated so completely with the castle ruins that imagining the village without them is almost impossible. In Edinburgh, a few kilometres southeast of Edinburgh Castle, there is a castle that receives a fraction of the visitors. Craigmillar Castle, built in the 14th century, Mary Queen of Scots retreated here during her deepest political crises. The meeting at which the murder of Darnley was allegedly planned took place here in 1566, or at least the historical majority position says it did. The Craigmillar Conference, as it is called, is one of the most debated starting points for one of the most contested events in Scottish history. Who sat where? Who knew what? Who made which decision? The only documents that cover this are partial and contradictory. What makes Craigmillar special is the feeling that the answers to those questions are close, but just out of reach. Visitor numbers are a fraction of Edinburgh castles. Tour operators rarely bring groups here, and the arrangement of rooms inside Craigmillar offers a perspective on how Mary actually lived that Edinburgh Castle cannot provide. Some of the most significant rooms in Scottish history are quietly sitting in this castle, largely unvisited. In South Wales, near Monmouth, Raglan Castle stands. Built in the 15th century, it was the most expensive private building constructed in Wales at the time. The main tower, known as the Great Tower or the Yellow Tower of Gwent, is surrounded by its own separate moat, making it an independent structure within the castle complex. This is an unusual feature in English and Welsh castle architecture. The Herbert family, who built Raglan, made choices in the middle of the Wars of the Roses. They built it as a statement of status and power, rather than as a functional military structure. Like Corfe Castle, Raglan was deliberately damaged by Parliamentary forces during the Civil War. The Great Tower was partially demolished, but unlike Corfe, Raglan survived largely intact, and as a preserved ruin, it has a specific beauty. The problem with Raglan is not visitor numbers. It is visited reasonably well. The problem is narrative. The castle's Welsh identity is absorbed into the larger narrative of English castle architecture in the official presentation, and the story of the family that built it, as Wales's most ambitious private statement in stone, is secondary to the architectural classification. On a rocky hill above Cardigan Bay in North Wales, Harlech Castle stands, one of Edward I's Iron Ring castles. Construction began in 1283, completed in 1289. The speed was extraordinary for the period, and when it was built, it was next to the sea. Boats could deliver supplies directly to the castle. Today there is a flat plain in front of the castle, and the sea is approximately a kilometre away. The coastline changed. The dune systems advanced. Harlech became disconnected from the sea. This physical change transforms the castle's story in a strange way, because the logic of Harlech, its water access, its supply route, its defense from the sea, depended on a physical geography that no longer exists. In 1404, Harlech was captured by Owain Glyndwr, and for a brief period functioned as the capital of Wales. Glyndwr's coronation took place here. This carries political and cultural weight for Wales, comparable to what Craigmillar carries for Scotland, but in the interpretation materials at Harlech, the Glyndwr period sits largely in the shadow of Edward I's construction. And now we have reached number 1. Deep in the Cairngorms National Park in Aberdeenshire, Braemar Castle stands. Built in 1628, after the Jacobite Rising, it was seized by the British state and used as a garrison for Hanoverian forces controlling Scotland. Eventually it was returned to the Farquharson family. This family held it for centuries. In the 1980s, maintenance costs became unsustainable. The Farquharson family transferred the castle to the local Braemar community, and today, Braemar Castle is run by that community. Volunteers keep it open. A community organization manages it. This is one of the rarest responses given to a castle anywhere in England and Scotland. Not a heritage organization, not a private investor, not a government fund. A community. Getting inside requires the permission of that community. Literally. The castle is managed by a volunteer team, and in some periods access is restricted. Of all the castles on this list, the thing you may least expect to find is the thing at number 1, a genuine example of people taking direct, honest responsibility for their own heritage, quietly continuing to work in the forests of the Cairngorms.